Um, it's my honor to be with you. You know, first of all, it's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you, dear Tillini. But thank you all to inviting me to give a lecture on international relations. And, you know, when I saw actually the program, you made it, then I thought, my God, I'm actually here with the future today, but the future of science of Sri Lanka. So, you know, I made it actually some small changes in my presentation because, you know, somehow I thought you can be change of your society. And, you know, in my presentation, I will follow actually the presentation of Professor Ranil Gunarante, because I think it is really the most important topic, how you can influence on your society, how you can influence on the global society. As you see already, we have troubles in global society as well, and you know the best situation in your country. But for the start, I will say a couple of words on global situation and challenges of global situation and what are the risks. First of all, allow me to share my presentation. 2 seconds. It was here, but I can't find it. 2 seconds, please. Okay, I'm back. So, I hope you can see my presentation. So, today I will discuss, as I said already, about position of young scientists, international relations, and how to be diplomatic in the position, how to achieve impact on policy. I truly believe all of you want to change something in the field you are working in. And when I thought how to discuss, but somehow I'm almost sure that all global challenges you can general development goals of United Nations. As you know, probably already on sustainable development goals, you will find 70 groups of more than 160 topics, 160 issues you have to work on. And when I am saying you have to work on, then I really think you. Why? Because you can't change only one of those topics. You can't change only one of those fields without to solve situation in other fields. They are all connected. And that is actually our future of our world. For example, when we are talking about no poverty is extreme important topic for the many countries on the world. For example, when we are talking about extreme poverty, and today we are talking about $2.25, that's only something over $2 per day. You have more than 10% the global population, they're living every day with only $2 or less per day. And we are calculating that is actually extreme poverty. And of course, our action need to be to reduce this extreme poverty. But not only extreme poverty, we have to reduce the poverty as well, the full poverty. For example, 65% of all population in the world living per day less than $10. 65% less than $10 per day. And when we are talking about global society, then we can say, for example, that 85% of the global population living under condition of $30 per day. And that is poverty as well. So only 3% of the global wealth belong to 30% of population. And that is something what we have to fight. And when we are talking about this no poverty, reduction of poverty, then we can come immediately to the point of 10. That is reducing inequalities. And inequalities is the most important topic, or to be honest, one of the most important topics when we are talking about inequalities. Is no poverty, zero hunger, good health, and all other topics are included in reduction in inequalities. And for example, inequality, you can see almost in every country, some dominant group, and you can see the other groups. The other groups are in lower position. Different country, different rules, but almost in each country on the global, you can see the gender inequality. That means actually that position of women and position of men, almost in every country in the world, are not equal. But in same position, the race, religion, ethnic, or other identity put some groups in every society in lower position and some in up position, in dominant position. That's something what we have to reduce as well. When we are talking, for example, about when we are talking about climate, number 13, climate action and climate change is really important as well. For example, last couple of years, we are facing on one hand, droughts for example, in Europe, and same times we have the floods in Asia, for example, in Pakistan. Same moment we have the coldness in America, for example. But all those weather elements are not only weather elements, they are actually extreme weather conditions, very extreme. And that's something what we are not useful for our societies. And that is really huge problem for the global society, not only for each society. And we have to come together and try to solve all those situations. For example, when we are talking about clean water and sanitation, today, 15% of all global population living in condition that they can have problem to achieve the water, drinkable water, 15%. And all analysis show us that to 2050, the number of people, they will live in the countries without easy access to drinkable water would be 25% of population. That means every fourth person will have the problem to reach drinkable water. That is actually extreme problem for the global society. Because, those kind of situation, any country in the world can't say, oh, that is not my problem. In my country, we have enough drinkable water. No. Because, this problem in one country will have for the consequences that we will have climate migrations from those countries with drinkable water problem, with the hunger problem, with the poverty problem, then we will have the world problem. So when we are looking for these key global challenges, I want only to say shortly that the global world, we made it huge progress in the last couple of decades. But in the front of us, we facing almost every year new problems. We have to come together and try to solve them. We know last couple of years we are living in pandemic and pandemic situation with COVID-19. Today is pandemic with COVID-19, but we saw actually we don't know how to face it, and maybe we are standing now in the front of new pandemic, and we don't know how to face it really. We saw and we are scientists, what we all suggested how to solve this situation. On the one hand, economic and the mental issue, mental health, what we have today is actually consequences of pandemic, of COVID pandemic. So in the moment, we are facing so many challenges, and now is the question how we can influence to achieve impact on policy. And the Joint Research Center of European Union prepared some advice material how every scientist can influence on policy making process. The first is actually to understand policy making first. The first point is actually what are the policy goals and what you want to have as a policy goals. The second topic is actually how are decisions made? What is decision made process? How to make this process? How to influence? Can you influence on the start or maybe on some late stage in the parliament? How you can influence to this process? And of course, very important question, who are the key actors? Because each person have not energy to contact each person in this policy-making process. You need to be concentrated on some key actors. And when we are talking about key actors, then it's, for example, that can be some politician, but it can be some company, or it can be some NGO, non-governmental sector organization. You need to see who is really the key actors in this policy-making process and to try to influence on them. Always is very important to put yourself in this policymaker's shoes. Because if you want to influence on this policymaker process, you need to understand how those policymakers, how those stakeholders actually react. What are their goals? You have to follow parliamentary debates, discussion on Twitter, and participate in policy-relevant events organized by think tanks, by political parties. Don't be afraid to be the part of this process, because that is really important. This will help you anticipate who may need relevant, timely evidence and when. You can influence with your research, with your analysis. You can be a change in this policy-making process. The question of the questions is actually, you have to discuss relevant questions together with policymakers and stakeholders. It is really important that you have direct contact with them, that you can direct contact with them on the same level. Try to understand questions from the public discussion. If you don't have direct access to the politicians, to the public discussion, try to understand the issue and questions from public discussion. Try to understand what are the challenges for the public. What is the challenges for the public is actually important for the policymakers, especially for politicians and especially for stakeholders. They want to know what the public opinion is, and they want to control this public discussion. So you have to influence on public discussion if you want some changes in some policy. Never forget, remain skeptical, but not cynical. Challenge questions and assumptions from policymakers and stakeholders. Uh, it is your role always to have questions. That is your role. You don't need to be cynical. That's always very dangerous in public debate. Actually, the public doesn't like if somebody is cynical, but everyone like if you have concrete questions, if you know how to put your analyze and to show that your research is really the best solution for some policy. Do not hesitate to reframe the problems and be brave in suggestion other types of research evidence than those requested by policymakers. Never forget, we all have blind spots. So policymakers as well, stakeholders as well. But never forget, you as scientists, you have blind spots as well. Sometimes we are actually run by our emotions. Of course, we are trying always to be run by our scientific conclusions, but we can't be totally objective. We are subjective people. So sometimes emotions run us as well, and we have blind spots as well. Accept that and try to recognize that early as possible. For policy impact early, think about the policy impact of your research early already when you design the project. And that is really important. The moment you design your project, you need to think immediately what is the policy impact, how you can impact on some policy, how you can change some position in your society. That is important already when you make design of your project. Scientific curiosity is a powerful driver for research, but if you are serious about policy impact, be prepared to adapt your research to the needs of policy actors. You need always to understand what is the policy actors' needs. They probably want to control public discussion, but it is only one of the parts of their needs. You need to understand that. And that's the reason that you have to plan impact strategically. Policymakers need quick responses and questions evolve with political discussion. For them, it's most important what the public, what the citizen thinking, and what is in this process possible to achieve. Never forget, the politicians living from elections to elections, and they're all the time in political campaign. And for them, it is important to win new elections. So they depend for the public opinion. They depend for the opinion in media. Your role is actually to be the part of media, to be the part of public discussion. It is always very important to see who is from policy, civil society, or industry interested in your results. Because those guys can be your friends. You can work together with them to achieve impact on policymaking process. When we are talking about policy impact, we can't forget it is a team sport. You can't work alone. You need support by others. And that is always. You can't achieve any policy alone. Improving the use of scientific evidence in a consequence and systematic manner is not an individual task, but a collective effort. And never forget that. You have to ask yourself always, who is in your team? Who is your friend? Who can support you? And who can you support as well. Your team includes policymakers, but also colleagues, networks, and organizations in research. So never forget that policymakers are not your enemy. They can be your best friend. You are in position to show them that they can win with your results. They can win with your support. Of course, your colleagues are your friends. Try to convince them to become your team, to help you to achieve this goal. The network you have is always very important. The network includes scientific friends, but not only scientific, society friends, the influential journalists, for example, for example, the people from the non-governmental sector. They can influence on debate. They can influence on policymaker process, and you can achieve the goal you really want to achieve. This includes all those policymakers, stakeholders, and you can make really changes if you think on policy impact as a team sport. Now is the question actually, who can be your ambassadors? It is always important because you can't be always in direct contact with policymakers and stakeholders, but maybe some colleague of you, maybe some person from media can be your ambassador for the evidence. And that is always important to have in the mind. We spoke already about to be critical, not cynical. And when we are speaking about become a critical friend, it is direct function of reliable and open relationship, as well as mutual understanding of needs, interests, and values. For us, it's really important to understand that trust allows researchers to understand policymakers and vice versa, that the policymakers can understand researchers and their research results. And that is really important. Relationship based on trust allows researchers to understand them. And without this trust, we can't achieve nothing, actually. We will have only enemies. And that is not something what we need. It is a lot of options how to say something negative for some policymaker. You need to say that on diplomatic way so that he is not afraid of your results. However, do not compromise with your scientific integrity just to get the politician message right. Be prepared to speak in convenient truth. Truth is actually the most important, and that's always scientific truth. It is scientific facts. You're talking always of scientific facts. And if someone challenge you and say something on personal level, you can say always, look, that's a scientific evidence. It's scientific facts. I can't change that. It's scientific. And that is actually the best protection for you and your position. It is very important to speak up in the policy debate. Networking online and offline beyond scientific circles helps you gain visibility and start to establish your trustworthiness in policy circles. That will help you to establish your position in policy circles. If the politician and bureaucrats see, and stakeholders as well, if they see you are active in policy debate, they will accept you as someone who is professional, who is deep in some topic, and they will consult you because they think you can influence and you can help them. You should use that and influence in the way you think that is the best for society. That's the best for your society and global society as well. You can do it by being invited to speak at policy events organized by some think tanks, by NGOs, by media, or some political parties. Don't forget, all of them are your friend. They can help you. They can support you. They're actually your team. You can win through those all networks. Without that, you will not win. It is almost impossible to win without very, very, very huge network and circle of people with same interest. If they don't have same interest in the moment, you are in position to convince them to have your position. Connect online and offline with relevant policymakers and other stakeholders. It is really important to talk with them on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook. You can always find different connections. LinkedIn is very important for each person who is stakeholder, who is policymaker, who want to play some important role in policymaker process. Use what you learn from the policy debate in fine-tune your work. And this is important because sometimes you will heard in policy debate in some think tank something what you don't think it is really true, and use that. Show that something what is already in policy debate is actually not really scientific fact. Use that to show your facts are really scientific facts and some other facts are actually not facts. Use that. Point policymakers to research relevant to the questions at issue at any moment in debate. And that is really important to show them, policymakers, how they can win with your result, how they can win with your process, how they can win and how you can support them to win. So make a friend of policymakers. This is really important step. When we are talking about become a bilingual in both science and policy, that means actually you need to understand that it is very different to speak in scientific circles and to speak in policy decision maker circles. It is totally different. Communicating to policymakers require different approaches than to scientists. Be able to tell a captive story that you can back up with facts is sometimes more convincing than yet more facts. It is really important how you talk in debate, how you talk with policymakers and stakeholders. It is not only to give more facts, because, you know, in some moment in public discussion, public don't trust anymore to facts if it's too many facts. You need to make priority of those facts. And then you have to repeat, and repeat. And never forget to repeat. Because when you say the first time that is in public, maybe someone heard it. Maybe. If you repeat it 100 times, then you have maybe some much longer and successful audience who heard that. And that is important always to repeat and the aim of science is to know, and the task of policy is to solve the problems. So we are actually friends. Maybe policymakers don't understand it always, but we are actually friends. So we both want to achieve something good for our society. On one hand, we know how to use that, we know how to make it, and we know what is actually the goal we want to achieve and what is the best for our society. And the policy is here to solve those problems. Policymakers also have different norms, culture, language, and time frames. Adapt your language and communication practices to this time-pressed audience. Use shorter, simpler forms. Use technical details and use narratives and visualizations. Give them sometimes something from the practice. Explain that on the way they can easily understand. Take the opposite approach to scientific paper and start with the conclusions. It is much more effective if you start with conclusions and leave background and methodology for the later. Because methodology for the policymaker process and the policymakers is not really important. They're interested in your conclusions and make conclusions very clear. That is important for them. Think also of new channels. Policymakers really read academic papers, but they follow the blogs, Twitter, and listen to podcasts. They're interesting what is actually written in media, in newspapers, because someone who reads newspapers is voter, and these voters will be elector, and they will elect them or not elect them. So for them, it's important that you have access to media, that you have access to blogs, to Twitter, and use these channels to present your position. When we are talking about no single discipline has all answers, sometimes we maybe forget that. We are thinking that we are champion of diversity when we are trying to put our discipline, but this is not true. We need to be champion of diversity to understand interdisciplinarity of each problem, of each policy-making process. Often our background is, as well as professional and personal values, influence the choices that guide our research. For instance, why did you choose a particular method, data set, or why you discuss a specific subset of theories? It is everything very subjective, and we use that how to understand some results, and we have some results through our subjective view. So we have these blind spots, and we need to accept that. But we need to understand we have it. And when we accept that, then we can talk with some other colleagues of us from another discipline to have information how this policy-making process will influence on them, how this policy, the final policy, will influence on in their field. So we can maybe change something by design the project on the first day. It is important to be aware and open about how your background and values shape your research choices. It is always very important to accept that we are run by some emotions as well, that we are run by some goals as well. Encourage diversity expertise in this policy-making room. If you implement all those moments, if you implement all those advices, probably you will have success in policy-making process. You will have and you will achieve impact on policy. Don't forget all those policymaker, all those stakeholders, all those guys next to your circles, make them all in your network and use them to achieve the goals. I really think it is important for each young scientist, never forget, be the change that you wish to see in the world. as Mahatma Gandhi once said. Thank you all.